They say limestone houses hold memories like scars in wood. On the outskirts of Brenham, where wildflowers tangle in fence lines and cicadas hammer at dusk, the weathered farmhouse sits empty most nights. But last summer, 12-year-old Rosie found herself in that lonely place, wearing her father's old denim jacket while her parents drove into town for supplies. The sun was dropping behind the mesquite, painting the sky orange and bruised purple. The air smelled of hot concrete, hay from a neighbor's barn, and a trace of diesel. Inside, the house felt cavernous, its limestone walls absorbing the hush, as if breathing out a slow, ancient sigh that settled over the floors and beneath the beams. Rosie turned the knob of the front door before her parents pulled away, a promise of light and dinner waiting in Brenham. Her mother had left her a list: check the mailbox, water the tomatoes in the side garden, and make sure the kittens had fresh water. She scribbled a heart on the yellow pad and wrote, "Be safe, sugar." The words felt small amidst the empty rooms, the high ceilings echoing every footstep. Upstairs, Rosie carried the watering can past the windows that stared out onto nothing but fields. The sky was empty of birds. A distant engine thrummed on Highway 290, its rumble tickling the floorboards like a heavy heartbeat. After she finished the chores, Rosie retreated to the living room where the old transistor radio sat on the mantel. Through the static, a cushiony voice read a passage from a mystery novel, all smooth pacing and broken lines. She turned the dial to bring in the station clearer, then nudged the volume low enough to whisper. The house felt too still. The vibration of the radio was its only pulse. Outside, shadows stretched long. Rosie sat cross-legged on the woven rug, propping the radio between her knees. A humming at the edge of hearing made her pause, but when she tilted her head she caught only the sigh of the wind slipping through the screen door. The crawlspace door sat under the staircase, nothing more than a low panel of wood painted the same cream as the walls, with an old brass latch that scraped when opened. Rosie had never ventured inside. Dad said it was for storage. Years ago he'd sealed most of it after a heavy rain collapsed part of the beams. The smell of damp earth rose every time someone cracked the panel, but she left it alone now, too lazy after chores. The kittens darted around her ankles, mewling for scraps. She rummaged in the kitchen for crackers and dropped crumbs on the rug. The white kitten lunged for a piece, scattering crumbs across the boards. She laughed, and the ring of it echoed until the radio crackled out. After dinner, when dusk turned to the color of bruised grapes, Rosie climbed the rickety stairs to her bedroom. The windows rattled in their frames, and she thought she saw shapes moving in the neighbor's pasture. She pressed her palm to the glass. The air outside cooled, but the house still held the day's heat. Shadows pooled in the corners. She closed the curtains and traced the floral wallpaper with her fingertip, the paper thin and peeling in places. Her flashlight sat on the nightstand, its beam fresh and sharp. She clicked it on. It illuminated specks or dust or something else rising like waves. She blinked, and the motes drifted back into the gloom, leaving her alone. Half an hour later, a scratch whispered through the ceiling overhead. Rosie froze, flashlight above her head, its cone slicing the dark. The kittens in her doorway arched their backs and hissed. She swallowed. The scratch came again, lighter this time, like the scuff of a shoe on wood. She set the flashlight on her bed and stood, knees stiff. The house settled as if inhaling. Through the cracked door she heard the hum of her parents' car engine fading down the gravel lane. Her pulse raced. She touched the wall for balance, feeling the cool limestone beneath her palm. She told herself it was a branch brushing the eaves. The farmhouse seemed old enough to make noises on its own. The scratch turned into a sigh, faint but distinct. It crawled down the hallway. Rosie's breath hitched. She moved toward the stairs, each footstep coaxing a groan from the boards. The kittens darted past, their fur raised. She stopped at the top of the stairs and listened. No wind, no crickets in the night, only a low shuddering exhale that sounded almost like a voice drawing a breath. Rosie swallowed and crept to her door, pried it open and stepped into the hall. Her flashlight trembled in her hand. She clicked the dimmer setting and pointed the light down the stairs. Dust motes floated in the glow. The bottom stair looked hollow, as if someone had scooped out the earth beneath it. It was when she reached the landing that she heard it clearly, her name, soft and lonesome, carved from air. "Rosie," the voice whispered. She froze, tears stinging. It sounded like her sister beneath the floorboards, but she had no sister. The house was empty of children besides herself. She forced a swallow and whispered back, "Mom? Dad?" Her voice cracked. No answer. The single bulb in the hallway flickered, plunging her into darkness for a heartbeat. She steadied herself, clicked her flashlight higher, and pointed it at the panel door under the stairs. The brass latch glinted. A fresh scratch had marked the wood, a shallow gouge that looked like a half-formed letter. Rosie's hand trembled as she reached for the latch. The kittens circled her feet. She lifted the panel and peered inside. Beneath the floor was a narrow stairway carved into earth and timber. The smell of wet dirt rose like a lungful of cold. She clicked the flashlight and stepped down. The beam jittered against the wall. Wooden beams held up the floorboards above, old and splintered. She bent and squinted. Footprints were pressed into the swampy ground, small and childlike. They led down the stairs and trailed into deeper shadow. A second later came another whisper, urgent and cold. "Rosie." She sucked in her breath, dropped the panel and stumbled back against the staircase. Heart rattling inside her ribs, Rosie edged away and tripped over one of her sandals. She landed on her knees, the flashlight skittering across the floor. Its beam danced on the wall, revealing the footprints again for an instant before blinking out. She scrambled for it. In the dark, her fingers found the switch. The beam returned. She shone it on the stairs one more time but saw nothing moving. The footprints had stopped at the bottom, as if whoever or whatever had been down there had vanished into the earth. Rosie stood slowly. Her legs wobbled. She forced her trembling hand to sweep the beam across the floorboards overhead. Something was up there. The boards pinched together at a narrow gap aligned over her head. Gathering her courage, Rosie crept back to the crawl space. She paused at the threshold and inhaled the scent of moss, rot, and stale air. Below, water seeped between stones. Her boots splashed. She clicked her flashlight and stepped down. The beam cut a tunnel in the dark. One by one, she descended 7 steps, her hand trailing along the rough boards. Somewhere behind her, the house hummed. She reached the last step and was on level ground. Mud stuck to her shoes. She knelt to examine the prints. They were too small for her. Fingers splayed in the soft earth, nails digging in. She traced one print with her fingertip and heard a tiny sigh from the darkness. Rosie turned quickly and aimed her flashlight into the black. The beam caught something faint, a child's doll, half buried in mud, its glassy eye reflecting light like a distant star. She swallowed, remembering the agreement never to touch things down here. But the doll lay just inches away. She leaned forward, fingertips grazing its tattered dress. The second she touched the cloth, a sound like dry branches snapping rose from behind her. She jerked back, stumbling a step, heart slamming. The doll's head rolled toward her, swiveling on a rusty nail. Its eye glinted. A whisper floated up from the far wall. "Will you stay with me?" Rosie screamed. The beam wavered as she scrambled upright. She ran up the stairs 2 steps at a time, dust and mud spraying behind her. At the top, she yanked the panel closed and latched it, her fingers trembling. She leaned against the door, breath ragged. The kittens mewled upstairs. She pressed her palm flat over the latch. The breathing, a low inhalation and exhalation, rattled behind the panel like a throat preparing to speak. Rosie yanked the old brass knob. It did not budge. Through the wood, she heard the faint scrape of a fingernail searching the latch from the other side. The panel shuddered under the pressure. Tears blurred Rosie's vision as she backed away. She raced down the hallway and into her room, slamming the door. She twisted the knob until it stopped and then shoved her dresser in front of it. The radio lay on the floor. She reached for it and clicked off the dial. Silence pressed in, thick and heavy. Outside, the wind rattled a window pane. She tucked beneath her covers, heart hammering. The kitten hopped onto the bed. She stroked its fur without feeling it. Every breath felt too loud. She wanted to call her parents but knew they were miles away. She closed her eyes and listened for footsteps on the floorboards above, but the house was silent. Night deepened. A fan in the hallway clicked on, though she had never turned it up. The door handle to her room rattled. Rosie clamped her eyes shut. The rattling stopped. In the suffocating quiet, she heard the slow shuffle of something moving on the floor above her head. She pictured a small shape walking the halls. Once the floorboard above her bed creaked, as if something paused. She dared not open her eyes. The breathing at the crawlspace panel had ceased. Instead, a different sound rose in the air, soft weeping, muffled and childlike. Rosie pressed her pillow over her ears, but the crying seeped through, wet and sorrowful. The crying grew louder, then suddenly stopped. A hush fell, thick as syrup. Rosie's eyes snapped open. The kitten was staring at the door, ears flattened. The door swung inward slowly, inch by inch, until a sliver of bone-white light cut across the room. No lamp or bulb beyond. Rosie sat up, spine rigid. The light widened, shaped like a child, pure and pallid. The figure stood in the doorway. No features, only the outline of a small body. It tilted its head. Rosie felt her lungs seize. Then it lifted a finger and pointed toward the floor. Rosie looked down at her feet, then back. The figure was gone. The door lay open. She bolted from the bed and charged the hallway. The house suddenly felt alien, every corner hiding something. She stumbled toward the front door but found it locked. Her parents had not thought to leave the key in the lock. She glanced left at the stairs that led to the crawlspace above. That door was still shut. Her chest burned with panic. She had 2 choices: stay in the haunted house or go down into the crawlspace. Neither made sense. She pressed a hand to her chest and screamed for help, but her voice cracked against the empty walls. Someone needed to get here. She ran to the windows and banged on the glass. The only response was her own echo. In the hallway, the radio sputtered to life, blasting static before settling on a station. A man's voice, leather thick and old, whispered, "Don't let her out." The volume faded until all she heard was the hiss of the speaker. Rosie covered her ears. She stumbled backward against the wall. The hallway lights flickered. On the floor, muddy footprints had appeared, small and trailing in from her room. They headed down the hall toward the basement door. Leather boots or bare feet. She leaned down. The prints glistened with damp. She glanced down the hallway, now empty. Her heart pounded. She forced herself to step toward the basement door. The knob was cool. She twisted it. The door creaked open, revealing a staircase into pitch black. She flicked on her flashlight. The beam fell on footprints again, deeper here, dipping into darkness. Dust motes danced. The scratching started below her, like something dragging fingernails along wood. She swallowed, took a breath, and crept down the steps. Her shoes squeaked. With each step, the scratch grew louder. At the bottom, she swept the beam across the wall to reveal hundreds of scratches, carved into the stone like a child's tally marks. She counted 50, then 60. They ended near a low tunnel, disappearing into nothing. Rosie pressed forward, breathing sharp. The floor angled underfoot, stones slick with moisture. She followed the marks until the tunnel opened onto a vast chamber, its walls uneven. Her flashlight flickered. She glanced over her shoulder. No ladder, no staircase. She was alone in the bowels of the earth. On the far wall, a shape crouched, small, hunched, its back to her. The breathing she had heard all night radiated from it, a hungry sigh. She swallowed and called, "Who's there?" No answer. She clicked the button again. The beam steadied. The figure turned. It had no eyes, only empty sockets dripping dark fluid. Its mouth stretched into a grin too wide for its face. Rosie's scream fractured the darkness. Everything happened at once. The figure lunged, its jaw snapping forward with a crack like branches breaking in a storm. Rosie flung her flashlight. The beam soared across the chamber before spinning out. She scrambled back, hands scrambling on wet stone. She crammed her fingers into the scratch marks on the wall and pushed forward, arms burning. She surged into the tunnel, stumbling, scraping knees raw. Behind her, the thing's screams echoed, a sound that she felt through her bones. She ran blindly, adrenaline scorching her limbs. She knew the way to the stairs. She prayed she would reach them. Light flared at the end of the passage. She burst through the panel into the hallway, gasping, as if ripped from water. The kittens flew past her legs, yowling. She dropped to her knees. Her dress was torn and dirt-caked. She pounded on the crawlspace door from the other side, but it held fast. The radio fell silent. The hallway light stabilized. Silence waited. A whisper brushed across her ear, cold and urgent. "I'm still here." Rosie scrambled upright and kicked the panel with both feet until it splintered. She squeezed through the gap and landed in the living room with a thud that rattled the windows. No one came. Her breath came in waves. She looked back. The panel lay broken. Mud dripped from the edges. She ran to the front door and yanked it open. Outside, the night was still, moonless. Cicadas had gone quiet. She stepped onto the porch, racing down the stairs and into the yard. The field stretched empty, but something moved in the darkness just beyond the halo of the porch light. A small girl's silhouette, holding a doll by its arm. Rosie froze. The girl raised her head, her hair plastered to her scalp, eyes shining. She lifted the doll's head and spoke in a voice that matched the scratching she'd heard. "Rosie, come back. We need to play." Rosie's legs unlocked. She sprinted across the yard, gravel biting her soles, heart pounding. She leapt into her father's truck, slammed the door. Her fingers fumbled for keys on the seat. The engine turned. She peeled away, tires kicking up pebbles. In her rearview mirror on the porch, the girl stood at the top step, doll in hand, watching her go. Rosie drove until the headlights carved ribbons through the night, not daring to look back. By the time she reached Brenham's single blinking stoplight, her breath had stilled and her mind numbed. She found her parents' car in the parking lot and flung open a door, collapsing into the hush inside. They turned, startled. She babbled words that made no sense before her breath hitched. Her mother reached for her. In the street lamp glow, drivers passed with faces anonymous behind windshields. The old farmhouse vanished in her rear view, but Rosie knew it was there, waiting. The next morning, her parents drove her back to the farmhouse. The sun stood low in the sky, smoky and dull. They found the front door swinging, the panel broken, and footprints leading from the crawl space to the porch. The neighbor who stopped to watch called it mischief, a prank. The prints in the dirt matched a child's shoe size, small. No one had any children who stayed after dark. Rosie said nothing. She walked through the house. The kittens scurried out of corners. The hall smelled of damp earth and something else she could not name. She stared at the ceiling and listened, but no voice answered. They boarded up the crawl space again, sealing it with fresh boards and nails. Rosie watched her father hammer, each blow echoing. She thought she saw movement behind the boards, a tiny fist tapping from within, but the boards lay firm by the time he shut the last nail. They drove away, the field slipping past. Brenham came back into view, the town waking with morning traffic. Her mother reached for her hand. Rosie looked out the window. In the distance, across the fields, the farmhouse stood silent. But she knew what lay below, a chamber counted with 50 scratch marks, a creature with a grin wide enough to swallow a child's soul, and a promise whispered in the dark, I'm still here. Rosie never spoke of the basement again. She left Brenham for college, then moved farther away, chasing city lights and busy streets. But the memory of the limestone walls and the stifled moans underfoot never faded. She learned to sleep with her back against the headboard, flashlight by her pillow. Rainstorms used to ease her mind, but now the drip of water through the eaves reminds her of the sound of the doll's head rolling in the mud. At night her phone screen illuminates her face. She resists looking up at shadows on her ceiling. In her dreams she is always back in that crawl space, the air thick, the whispers tight against her ear. Last summer, Rosie received a postcard with no return address, just a smudge of brown ink and a single word scrawled across the front, Rosie. On the back, nothing but smears where an eraser had tried to remove more words. She held it aloft, her heart sliding into her throat. The past had found her. She stared at the envelope's corner where the stamp should have been, but only felt the pulse at her wrist. That night, her lights flickered. From beneath her bed, she heard the slow scrape of fingernails along wood. She did not call out. She did not move. The scratching grew louder, and a voice as soft as moonlight whispered, Rosie, one syllable pulling her back into that dark place where some things cannot be unlived. Even now, years later, when Rosie visits home, she still checks the floorboards at twilight. She hears the echoes of her name curling through the rafters. They say the crawl space waits, hungry for the next small feet to wander in. And sometimes, on a long, quiet night, if you stand outside that old limestone house, you can hear faint scratching, like nails down a dusty board. You might even hear whispers calling your name, but don't answer. Don't ever go down there, because some voices aren't there to guide you. They're there to never let you go. I had never been superstitious, but when I agreed to house sit for the Hendersons in their old Dallas bungalow, I felt a subtle shiver settle in my bones. The house stood on the edge of town, its neat brick facade cracked by decades of sun and shifting soil. Around it, ragged clumps of mesquite and juniper cast twisted shadows in the porch light. They'd warned me about the basement, a sealed brick wall they said had been built over the entrance sometime after Prohibition, a relic of another owner's strange obsession. Nobody had used those stairs in nearly 100 years, and the metal door at the bottom was welded shut. I told myself it was just local legend, something to amuse weekend visitors. I was 32 and practical, a junior reporter covering boring city council meetings. Ghost stories didn't fit into my world. That first night I unpacked my laptop and a couple of novels, told myself I'd get some writing done. I turned off the porch light, sealed the front door, and flicked on a lamp in the living room. The Hendersons would return Tuesday morning. By then I'd have a clean house, some leftover lasagna in the fridge, and maybe a few good anecdotes about the neighborhood stray cats. Around midnight I heard the distant bark of a dog, maybe a coyote. The air was still, warm enough to smell the faint hint of gasoline from the closed-off gas station 2 blocks over, the one with its blinking neon sign half dead. Cicadas droned somewhere beyond the chain-link fence. I curled up on the sofa and read a chapter before fatigue crept up. At exactly 3:07 a.m. my phone buzzed with the time. I shifted, blinked at the ceiling. Then I heard it, a low metallic groan like iron scraping against stone. It came from below. My heart jolted. I paused, listening. The groan repeated, a single long note that faded into silence. I sat up, every nerve alert. The basement hatch in the dining room lay flush with the floor, its brass handle dulled. I stood and crossed to it, each floorboard creaking under my weight. My hand hovered above the handle, but I refrained from opening it. What logic could explain a sealed hatch moving? The Hendersons had sent a contractor's photo of the walled-up entry. My phone still showed 3:07. I told myself it was the heat, the house settling into the cool of night. I went back to the sofa, hugged my knees and stared at a muted TV. My pulse thudded like a trap closing. 20 minutes later I heard it again, a soft scrape, then the thud of something heavy sliding. I bolted upright. The living room seemed normal, faint moonlight filtering through lace curtains. I crossed silently to the stairwell that led to the dining room, each step calculated. The hatch lay open. Air rushed upward, carrying a chill deeper than the night air outside. My skin prickled. I peered down, eyes straining in darkness that seemed to swallow my gaze. The light from the hall lamp didn't reach the first 3 steps. I could just make out the metal door, now slightly ajar. The lock plate warped as if forced. No breeze could have pushed it. No human could have navigated that tight old stairwell without disturbing the floorboards above. I swallowed hard and ducked down, one hand on the railing, the other gripping my phone as a makeshift flashlight. I clicked on the torch, the beam trembling. The steps were uneven stone, slick with damp. My light caught the metal door's edge. It stood open maybe 3 inches. A coarse handprint marked its surface, streaked with rust or something darker. I placed my palm against it, icy. My breath came fast. I heard footsteps below, Slow pacing, step, pause, echoing off stone walls. They moved away, then back, as though someone circled inside a locked cage. I swallowed my fear and called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" Silence. But the footsteps stopped. My stomach churned. Something in that silence felt alive, waiting. "Who's there?" I tried again, voice cracking. A low keening sound rose, half moan, half wind. I stumbled back, nearly losing my footing. The door slammed shut with a clang that rattled the entire house. I tumbled down the remaining steps, landing on my side, chest heaving. My phone skidded across the floor, torch still on, illuminating nothing but bare stone. I scrambled upstairs, heart pounding so loud I thought the walls would shake. My adrenaline blurred everything. I slammed the hatch closed, wedged a chair against it and backed away, breath ragged. I crouched in the corner of the dining room for the rest of the night. Dawn came pale and unresolved. The Hendersons returned to a locked basement, a chair on the hatch, and me haggard, wide-eyed. They found the lock untouched, the brick wall inside intact. I swore I'd seen footprints in the dusty subfloor, but they chalked it up to rodents or swollen wood. When I took the job, I never expected more than a free weekend in a bigger house. But after that night, I couldn't shake the dread. The moment the sun dipped below the oaks, my phone buzzed to 3:07 again and again on the clock. I'd find myself staring at it with sweat beading on my back. I never dared go near the dining room after nightfall. A week later I returned with a video crew, determined to debunk the noise. I set cameras around the hatch, in the stairwell, even one in the living room pointed at the Victorian-era rug that covered the center floor. I planned to capture every frame, confident the footage would reveal some logical cause, draft, settling, nothing supernatural. We waited until midnight. Nothing. My recorders showed silence at 3:07. I teased the crew, made jokes about midnight snacks, then we packed up and left. I watched the playback that evening. The cameras rolled through darkness, the basement hatch sealed, the dog barking outside. Then at 3:07 a.m., the second camera caught it, a whisper of movement, as if a breeze swept under the door. Then the hatch trembled on its hinges, metal screeched. The camera's infrared glow revealed only a shifting shadow, no form, no human figure. Then the camera snapped off. My heart caught in my throat. My coworker leaned closer. He said he'd stay the next night. He brought his own gear, cables, generators. I couldn't talk him out of it. He said science could explain everything. We set up mics in the basement, motion sensors, pressure plates on the stairs. I watched monitors with him, adrenaline and coffee. Midnight passed, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. We joked about cheap thrills. Then at 3:07 a.m., the first camera died, cut to static. The second camera showed the hatch rising on its own, graying light spilling down. The pressure plate registered heavy footsteps trod slowly, then reversed. The motion sensor kicked on, just a blur of gray. Then the metal door slammed shut. The doorbell rang 3 times in rapid succession, though the doorbell was wired to a different circuit and none of us dared approach the porch. My coworker reached for the mic, asked, "Who's there?" A voice rasped, "Why have you come?" The feed cut. The monitors blinked off. My coworker bolted upright, pale. He whispered, "We have to go." I nodded, too stunned to speak. We packed gear in the dark, stumbling over cables, terror draining our bravado. When morning came, the cameras lay smashed, each lens cracked as if something had stuck its claw through. I quit the paper soon after. I couldn't write about city council anymore. The basement had a grip on me, a promise of returning shadows. The Hendersons sold the house months later to a film student who loved its vintage charm. I heard he left halfway through his first night, muttering curses about noises under the floor. He boarded up the dining room hatch with plywood and duct tape. Nobody's lived there since. Some nights I drive past the bungalow on my way home, headlights illuminating the empty yard. I see nothing but sagging windows and a curtain that refuses to stay tied. My clock still jumps to 3:07 when I'm half asleep. Sometimes I wake and swear I hear footsteps pacing outside my bedroom door. No one's ever tried to hurt me, but I feel watched. I feel pursued by something ancient and hungry. Last week I got a message from the new owners. They wondered if I could check on the house again. They'd heard noises in the walls, a whisper low and insistent, "Let me out." I stared at the text and felt a jolt. My palms went cold. I remembered that copper-smelling air, the smear on the metal door, the weight of those unseen footsteps. I typed back, "I'm sorry, I can't help." I locked my phone and opened my front door instead, stepping into the night air heavy with pine and dust. In the distance a train whistle cried. The highway beyond it stretched to hell and back. I drove on, never looking back. Tonight, my clock buzzed again. It was 3:07. My heart synced with its chime. I swore I felt a draft at my feet, a soft click beneath the floorboards where the basement hatch might lie. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Not again." But I knew already the hinges would groan, the door would open, and the thing that lived in the dark would come pacing once more. Jana's hands trembled when she stepped onto the cracked concrete of her porch, the midday sun bending through the mesquite and juniper, casting thorny shadows across the peeling wood. She frowned at her phone, the grocery list glowing in her palm, and glanced toward the nursery window where the pale curtains fluttered in the soft breeze. Behind them, 8-month-old Eli slept, his breath a gentle tremor in his crib. She'd left him only 30 minutes ago, and yet every mile she drove east on Highway 183, past the burned-out gas station and the shuttered feed store, she dialed home to check the monitor. Silent. White noise. The steady hum that lulled her into thinking he was safe, that nothing in Lockhart's sleepy outskirts could possibly threaten her boy. A trick of the imagination, she told herself, nerves frayed by loneliness, fueled by old wives' tales in diners about restless spirits haunting the county roads. She shook her head, pocketed her phone, unlocked the screen door and barreled inside, boots thumping through the narrow hallway, ears straining for that familiar static. It was there before she reached the nursery, soft and insistent, like a cradle song she'd never heard, a lullaby drifting through the speaker, each note fragile and uncanny in the tight hush of the house. Jana froze, blood thudding in her temples, the echo of her own pulse loud against the calibrated buzz of the monitor. That tune belonged nowhere in her world. She had never sung to him. Her mother's voice had echoed in her head only yesterday, singing in broken German about distant fields, and that was lullaby enough. Her chest tightened as the song wound its way through the speaker again, a cold thread pulling at her spine. She threw herself down the hallway, hands fumbling with the handle, but the nursery door was locked from the inside. The latch clicked stubbornly against the frame. Jana's heart lurched, breath rasping in her throat. She yanked at the doorknob and it didn't budge. The monitor speaker hissed, repeating the soft melody, the same words sung low and unearthly. She pressed her ear to the door and heard a coo, like Eli, but the timbre was wrong, wounded, distant. Jana reeled backward, pain flaring across her chest, somewhere between terror and grief. She backed into the hallway light, the bulb overhead swinging lightly on its chain, though the wind had died. Overhead the attic vents clanged in protest. She dropped to her knees, placing her palm flat against the wood, skin prickling where she touched it. "Eli," she whispered, voice cracking. The monitor stuttered, crackled, then the voice inside warbled, and the lullaby resumed more clearly, more insistently. Another click, like the winding of an old music box. Jana scooched along the wall, searching for the slide bolt, yanked it free. The door swung inward on silent hinges. She spun, light from the window flooding the room, illuminating the crib in one dreadful beam. The monitor lay on the floor by the newborn mattress, its screen alive with static and the word baby flickering. The soothing white noise was gone. Now only that song on loop, its melody crawling through the air. Jana's lips parted, throat raw. She pivoted toward the crib. Sheets rustled. A small shape shifted beneath the pale yellow blanket. Relief surged through her, fouled immediately by the sight of the tiny fist that pulled at the covers. She exhaled one breath too soon. The shape rose slowly. Little Eli sat upright, his eyes closed, body swaying to the rhythm of the lullaby. His face was creamy, serene, but the head rocked with an eerie grace that no infant could muster. Jana slammed into the wall, mind reeling, tears blistering behind her eyelids. "Eli," she said again, voice low, pleading. The cradle rasp of his breath was odd, too measured, like the ticking of a clock. He opened his eyes. They were pale gray, unspeaking, old eyes. Jana staggered forward, her knees hitting the floor. "Oh God," she whispered, hand stretched out. Eli reached with that slow, deliberate motion, arm lengthening, fingers curling. The lullaby climbed toward a final note, and then paused, silence cruel in its intensity. Jana reached for the baby monitor on the floor. She lifted it shakily, voice trembling. "Stop," she said. "Nothing." The screen flickered once. The latch on her hand tightened. She looked down to see that he held one of her fingers, cold, unmoving. Pain like ice shot through her palm. "Eli," she whimpered, but his grip loosened. He tilted his head, listening, and the lullaby started again, softer, distant, as if sung from far away. Jana scrambled backward, dropping the monitor. It crashed into the hardwood, shattering its plastic skin, wires spilling like entrails. She lunged for the crib, ripping off the blanket to find it empty. She blinked at the smooth mattress, quilt imprinted with bears and moons, undisturbed. The open nursery window beckoned, gauzy curtains flapping in the sudden breeze. She swung around, and there, perched on the windowsill, was her son. He balanced with perfect stillness, the sun catching the fine down of his hair, making it glow. Jana stood, legs shaking, every muscle screaming. She called to him, voice bright and broken. Eli's body stiffened as he turned toward her, backlit by afternoon light. His features sharpened into something unfamiliar, too angular, too precise, as though carved from alabaster. He lifted both arms, beckoning. Jana closed the distance in 2 frantic strides, grabbed him as he began to slip. There was no struggle, only the ethereal whisper of fabric as she swept him into her arms. His body was limp, weightless, as if he weighed nothing. Inside his face, eyes closed, a slow, contented sigh. Jana pressed him to her chest, adrenaline hammering. "Eli," she cried, the world tilting around her. She turned to slam the window shut and bar it, but froze at the sight of footprints in the soft earth beneath. Tiny prints, just like a baby's, looping from the porch to the window pad, unearthed by the breeze. She blinked down at them, cold dread pooling in her gut. Every print dipped into the grass, then stopped, no return marks. Jana sank to the floor, clutching her son. He stirred, blinking open eyes that were his own again, dark brown, curious, innocent. She stroked his cheek, her hand slick with sweat. He reached up and touched her face. In his palm, a single bead of blood glowed. Jana gasped, eyes wide. She dropped him against her hip, grabbing a blanket from the rocking chair. She wrapped him, rocking in a circle until his limbs relaxed, trusting again. She whispered reassurances, unable to form coherent thoughts. The house moaned around them, the floorboards, the wind through the attic vents, the distant hum of the highway. She rocked until the sun dipped low, gauzy dusk flooding the windows, and she realized the lullaby persisted in her mind, soft notes threading through her thoughts. She climbed from the rocking chair, still swaying, cradling Eli. She crossed to the monitor on the floor, picked up the mangled device, saw the tiny speaker still lit with static. Then the melody began again, so faint she wondered if it was in her head. She dropped the monitor, backed away. The song swelled, drifting from everywhere and nowhere, the words indistinct but aching with longing. Jana pressed her shaking hand to her ear, and the tune sharpened, a mother's lullaby in a language she almost recognized, one she never learned. Her breath hitched. She dropped to her knees beside the crib. Inside the mattress crease she saw a scrap of paper folded into a triangle. She picked it up, fingers shaking, unfolded it. In looping script, one line, "Your lullaby still lives here." Jana felt everything go cold at once. She glanced at little Eli, curled against her shoulder, breathing even, warm. She pressed the note between her fingers, looked back down the hall. Her mind raced, imagining shapes moving in the corners of her vision, shadows pooling where none should be. She closed her eyes, breath slowing, and when she opened them, the nursery door was shut. The latch clicked softly. Jana bolted upright, cradling her son, reaching for the doorknob. It didn't move. She pressed her ear to the wood. Silence this time. The lullaby had stopped. She exhaled, relief flooding her, but the silence felt worse. In the hallway behind her, a soft thud echoed, like a foot brushing the floor. Jana's heartbeat thundered in her ears. She spun around. The rocking chair was moving, back and forth, empty. She took a step backward. The monitor on the floor flickered on. Static spilled from the speaker. A voice, distant and echoing, called her name. Not Jana, but something older. Older than the house. She didn't know the word, but her bones recognized it. It breathed around her. In its depths she heard the soft chorus of lullabies, thousands of them, layered, weaving through time. She froze, tears brimming. The lamp beside the crib sputtered and went out, plunging the nursery into darkness. Only the monitor glowed, and the empty rocking chair still swaying in the black. Jana pressed the baby to her chest, whispered, "You're safe," though she wasn't sure any of it was true. She closed her eyes, feeling the lullaby coil around her heart, pulling her into the silent promise that some songs never end. Miguel pulled into the driveway just as the sun dipped beneath the knotty mesquite lining Longwood Lane, the sky burning orange and violet against the stubby Texas oaks. His little sister Marisol was already peeking through the front window, her dark curls bouncing as she waved excitedly. Their parents were running late in Houston, caught in traffic after a long work conference, and Miguel, a freshman at UH-Katy taking summer classes online, had volunteered to babysit. He patted the steering wheel, glanced at the rearview mirror, and reminded himself that everything would be fine. It always was, until tonight. He stepped out and heard the faint hum of cicadas mingling with the distant roar of a tractor-trailer on FM 1463. The air smelled of juniper and fresh-cut grass. He grabbed his backpack and made his way up the stoop while Marisol darted past him into the quiet house. Miguel flicked on the porch light, stiffened at the sudden brightness in the cool evening, then shrugged it off. Inside, the living room felt cavernous in the semi-darkness, the TV off, the couches pushed back to make room for Marisol's favorite cartoons. He changed into sneakers, set his phone to Do Not Disturb, and called out, "Hey Marisol, ready for a movie night?" She appeared at the bottom of the stairs, clutching her stuffed puppy. "Can we watch that one with the fireflies?" she asked, her voice echoing slightly in the empty hall. He nodded, turned toward the TV, and paused when he saw a soft, wet smear on the screen, like someone had left a fingerprint of blood. He rubbed at it with his sleeve. Marisol hopped onto the couch, legs crossed, and he sank beside her, heart thumping at the chill creeping down his spine. It was probably just a stray smudge from earlier that day, he told himself. After the movie credits rolled, Marisol yawned and headed upstairs for bed. Miguel followed, flicking on the hallway light. The mirror at the top of the stairs caught his reflection, tousled hair, anxious eyes. He felt goofy staring at himself so long. "You okay, big guy?" he whispered. No answer but the faint hum of the air conditioner. He pushed open Marisol's door and stood in the doorway, taking in the pastel walls decorated with her school photos and fairy light garland. She was tucked under a quilt patterned with blue bonnets, eyes fluttering shut. He leaned in to kiss her forehead, then steadied himself against the wall. In the corner, the full-length mirror Arthur's home decor had delivered last spring gleamed. Miguel stifled a shiver when he thought he saw another face in the glass, pale and wide-eyed, hovering behind his own. He jerked his head around. The room was empty except for him and Marisol's eyelashes brushing her cheeks. He blinked and looked back at the mirror. Only he stared back. The mirror was silent, still. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding and crossed the floor to her nightstand. He set her alarm clock, flicked off the lamp, and whispered, "Sweet dreams." He padded back downstairs for a glass of water. In the living room, the TV now displayed a static line where its glow should have been. He reached out, pressing the power button, but the picture stayed gray. Frustrated, he stood and noticed the sliding glass door at the back of the house. Moonlight traced the outlines of cypress trees at the pond behind the fence. For a moment he thought he saw a silhouette behind the glass, too tall, too still. He stepped closer. The glass was clear. No silhouette. His breath fogged the surface and he wiped it away. Nobody out there. The night was silent except for frogs croaking by the water's edge and the faint hum from the road. He poured water into a glass at the kitchen sink. The faucet's drip echoed in the empty room. Behind him, the reflection in the window showed him turning around. He reached for the door handle. As he did, his reflection's eyes lingered on his shoulder. He froze. The eyes narrowed and the reflection's mouth curved into a grin that stretched too wide. Realizing the mirror image mouthed no words, his pulse thundered in his ears. He spun around. Nobody. But when he turned back to the window, the grin had vanished. He nearly dropped the glass. "Am I losing it?" he muttered, clutching the countertop. He chugged the water and set the glass down with a crack. At that moment his phone buzzed. A text from his mom. "Running 10 minutes late. Are you guys good?" He tapped out. "All good. Be safe." He pressed send, and the buzz died. He leaned against the counter in the dim light, the kitchen appliances casting long shadows. Every reflective surface in that room suddenly seemed like a trap. He forced a shrug and pocketed his phone. Better to take his mind off it. He wandered into the den where the old brass-framed mirror from Grandma's house still hung above the fireplace. The wood mantel was dusty, the logs cold. His reflection stared back at him. No grin. He let out a shaky laugh. "Nice one, brain." Then he noticed something. The reflection's hand rested on the mantel, fingers splayed, but his real hand hung at his side. He raised his hand. The reflection did not. His chest tightened. He looked away. When he looked back, the reflection had its hand on its hip, as if waiting for him to catch on. He slapped the glass with his palm. The noise snapped the image back into alignment. He staggered back. He felt the hairs on his neck prickling. Something was here with him, packing the house with dread. He tiptoed through the den to the front door. Maybe stepping outside would clear his head. The air was warm, thick with the scent of damp earth and mesquite smoke from a neighbor's backyard grill. A cool breeze stirred the leaves. He took a slow breath and exhaled. Behind him, the foyer lantern swung slightly, though no one had touched it. He glanced at the entry mirror. The hallway light glowed, and the reflection behind him filled the frame, bright eyes loitering just over his shoulder. He whirled. Empty hall. That grin again. He ran his hand through his hair, cursed under his breath, and darted back in. He slammed the door and locked it. His breath came fast and sweat beaded on his brow. He needed a plan. He flicked on the hall light and headed to Marisol's room. Maybe she'd heard something. She lay safe, dreaming peacefully. He bent over her. "You okay?" He touched her shoulder. She mumbled in her sleep but stayed curled up. Thank God. He left the door open and sprinted upstairs to his parents' room for a bat or baseball glove, anything to feel safe. He yanked the door open. The room was dark, but for the moonlight on the bed, his dad's golf club stood by the closet. He grabbed the driver grip, his knuckles whitening. A floorboard creaked below. His heart slammed. He stalked to the top of the stairs, club poised. Halfway down, he spotted it. The reflection's face pressed to the glass partition of the stairwell window, lips parted in an agonized pout, chin squeezed against the cold pane. But when he blinked, it disappeared. The grin had turned to a scowl. He stood frozen, the club held high. Mirrored surfaces lined the stairwell, walls of glass that led to the landing below. Each pane showed nothing but darkness. He took one trembling step down. A loud thud behind him made him whip around. Nothing. He counted to 5. He let himself believe it was the old pipe settling, then another thud. From above now, he bolted down the stairs, slammed the back door open, and dashed across the patio into the backyard. The crickets sang, a distant train horn wailed, and the water in the pond rippled. He ran to the fence gate, yanked it open, and was halfway through when something grabbed his ankle. He screamed and fell. The grass was cold and slick. He twisted, trying to kick free, but his foot slid out. He scrambled to his knees and looked back. The reflection crouched between the shuttered windows of the house, pale face luminous in the moonlight, grinning wide, eyes black as oil. Then it flickered and sank into the siding. He scrambled up, flew through the gate, and sprinted to the street. His heart thundered as he sprinted under the street lamp, the uneven asphalt under his sneakers, the cracked signs for no outlet, and speed limit 30 rolling past. He kept running toward the highway. KM 1093, where a dimly lit gas station waited like a beacon. The roar of traffic on I-110 sounded closer. He dared a glance back. The house sat silent in the darkness, but for a faint glow at the upper window where Marisol's room was, a face appeared there, a pale child's face, with a tiny grin. He clenched his fists and ran faster, high-pitched fear echoing in his ears, until he burst onto the shoulder of the highway. A trucker slowed his rig, called out, "Hey, you lost kid." Miguel pounded on the door. The driver opened it, flashlight trained on him. His eyes darted back to the suburban neighborhood swallowed in night. He stammered, "Please, they're in there, my sister." The driver frowned. "What are you talking about?" Miguel pointed. "My sister." "Something's in the house." The driver shook his head. "You sure you ain't dreaming?" Behind Miguel, headlights traced patterns on the garage door. The reflection's grin bloomed in every window as the trucker edged back. Miguel sobbed. "It's not a dream." The driver backed away, fumbled his phone. Miguel looked back at the house. The door swung open. In the threshold stood Marisol, her face lit by the porch light. She looked exactly as she should, small, wide-eyed, terrified. She held her puppy tight. Relief and dread warred in Miguel's chest. He sprinted toward her. The driver called out, "Hey kid," but Miguel didn't stop. He scooped her up with a sob. She clung to him. "Miguel," she whispered. "Miguel, I'm scared." He hugged her, his own fear crashing through him. He glanced back at the dark windows. Every pane held a reflection, his own face, twisted in meat-cold fear, and another face behind him, pressed close. He spun, brandishing the golf club, but the reflection in the glass was already gone. Night wrapped around them like a blade. The driver called again, voice wavering, "You okay?" Miguel didn't answer. He kept his eyes on the house as the truck's headlights faded. Behind them, the silent reflection watched through the windows, shifting, grinning. Holding Marisol tight, Miguel turned toward the highway, his ears ringing, his soul hollow with dread. As they reached the pavement, he dared one last look at the house on Longwood Lane. On the topmost window, a face stared back, his own face, smiling. "She's upstairs too." I remember the night with a clarity that still makes my skin prickle. The air heavy with the scent of juniper and creosote drifting through the cracked window, the distant hum of a gravel road where tumbleweeds scuttled like restless children. 9-year-old Kara lay sprawled on the faded floral couch in her living room in Tyler, Texas, eyelids fluttering as cartoons flickered on the TV, the glow painting her face with blues and pinks. Mama thought she was fast asleep, tucked under a quilt that smelled faintly of lavender and old cotton. Anna, her 12-year-old sister, was away at band camp 200 miles north, the brass and percussion of some marching band rehearsal echoing through phone calls and postcards. Watching Kara drift off, I felt a tender ache. This was the first night Kara was truly alone in that big old house they'd moved into last spring, a bungalow built in the 20s with creaking floorboards and a narrow staircase that curved to the second story like a pale spine. I closed the door gently, slipped out to the kitchen for a glass of water, and when I returned, a sliver of moonlight showed me Kara's small form motionless on the couch, blanket bunched beneath her chin. I perched on a stool nearby and studied the shadows under the coffee table where dust motes danced in the silver beams. Everything was quiet except for the slow hiss of the window air conditioner. I could hear my own heart beating. She's safe, I told myself, and settled back to watch, determined to stay awake until she was deep in dreams. In that half-state between watching and sleeping, I thought I saw the shape of a child climb the stairs, a silhouette framed by pale light. It moved with a hesitant grace, as if testing each step, and hesitated at the top before coming down. My breath caught. I blinked. Nothing. The screen's light flickered. The shape dissolved. I glanced again. Kara's eyes were still closed. When I woke fully, I was certain I must have dreamed it. I leaned forward to brush a lock of hair from Kara's forehead and froze. 2 small footprints pressed in the thin layer of dust on the old oak coffee table. Tiny toes splayed, heels clear. They faced the couch, proof someone had knelt and left those prints. I counted the toes again, then suppressed a scream. Footprints weren't like dropped socks. You cleaned off that table before she went to bed. Dust didn't gather in perfect shapes all at once. I touched the cool edge of the table, heart pounding, and the footprints seemed to breathe beneath my fingers, alive with possibility. I ran upstairs to Kara's room, anticipation coiling in my stomach. The hallway lamp was off, the air heavy, and I pressed the light switch. Darkness. The bulb must have blown. I fumbled for my phone, switched on the flashlight, and found her bed empty, covers rumpled. Her bedroom door creaked softly in the current. I called her name. Her voice floated down. "I'm fine, Aunt May." I wanted to get a snack. Relief eased my chest, and I motioned her back to bed, scooped her up and tucked her in, promising story time if she'd lie still. Her eyes were heavy, her voice sleepy. "Did you see her?" she whispered. I frowned. "See who?" She shivered. "Anna." She climbed the stairs to tuck me in. I swallowed hard. "Anna's at band camp, sweetheart." She frowned with childish innocence. "Let me stay with you, May." Then a pause. She said, "Let me stay with you." The hair on my arm stood on end. We lay in the dark, the distant howl of a coyote drifting through the screen. I stayed until her shallow breaths steadied, then crept out and slid the bolt. I checked the staircase, wiped the railing. Nothing unusual. No wet wood or smeared dust. I climbed to the attic hatch, braced my weight and shone the light inside. Nothing. No kid, no shape, just old trunks and mothballs. Over the next few nights the air grew colder than the creeping August chill should allow. Kara swore she heard Anna whispering from the hall. I chalked it up to childhood fantasies until I found the small scuffed footprints again, this time leading from the living room rug to the front hall and stopping at the closed door of the pantry. I opened it, and the smell of stale cereal drifted out, but the tile floor was unmarked. She couldn't have walked there without making prints in the pantry. She couldn't have made any of it. No one was in the house with her. Friends told me I was imagining things. My sister's daughter was isolated out there, my mind playing tricks. But the old house had a history. Neighbors whispered about the little girl who died in the upstairs bedroom in 1943, small of stature, a fever that claimed her before polio vaccine existed. Mother Nora, the previous owner, carried her ashwood crib to the front yard when her son was born, and some said the house never forgave that. Doors that slammed at midnight, soft crying behind closets, footsteps in the attic. I'd laughed it off until I heard that crying myself, one humid night, pressed against the thin wall separating the girls' rooms. Kara woke me sobbing, saying Anna was crying. I went to her door, and there in the hallway was a shape, pale and thin, backlit by the sliver of moon through the window at the end of the hall. It swayed like a willow branch in a breeze, hair tangled. I called out and it vanished, leaving drips of cold air that rushed past me with the faint scent of lilac, and something older, something decaying. I decided to leave, drive Kara to Mama's house and admit I couldn't do this alone. But packing up only brought more. In the trunk of the car I found a doll I didn't own, its painted face cracked, one eye missing, lace dress yellowed. I never saw Kara with it. I threw it back in the house and locked the door behind us. That night we stayed at Mama's, until the phone rang at 2 in the morning. A soft voice like the wind through mesquite leaves, an adult voice whispering, "Let me stay with you." The line went dead. I threw the phone across the room and it landed face down, screen cracked. Kara drew pictures of a girl on our living room couch, scribbles of long hair and dark eyes and a line of footprints. "She's pretty," Kara said. I felt a hollow ache when I realized the girl had no feet, just the footwear marks. The next time I stayed there I slept on the floor with Kara. In the pale hours before dawn I felt a pressure against the back of my head, a whisper, "Let me stay." The voice was soft, pleading. I froze, stared at the doorway. Nothing. But I could hear soft breathing. I poked Kara. She didn't stir. I sat bolt upright. The window was open, curtains fluttering and curtains making tall shadows on the walls. The window lock was untouched. I drove to the local bookstore and bought a copy of The Haunting of Hill House for Kara to read when she got older, something to ground her in rational fear. The bookseller eyed me curiously when I asked for stories of restless spirits and little girls lost in the upstairs rooms. He sighed and told me the legend of the Ashwood house at the edge of town. That house burned down in 1968, but people said its spirit found another nearby house to haunt. The footprints in the dust, the crying upstairs, the pleading voices. It fit too well. We moved to a rented apartment in town. For a month, nothing. Kara laughed again, chased neighborhood kids, wore her favorite dress. During the day she talked about Anna's return from band camp, and I hugged her close, just relieved the horror had slipped away. But then I woke to her door creaking. I found her in the living room at midnight, standing before the French doors that led to the balcony. The moon was full, silver on her face. Behind her the carpet bore footprints, tiny, 8 shadows like a small person pacing. She touched the window and said softly, "Come inside." I grabbed her hand and yanked her back. There was no one on the balcony. That morning the sky was sickly pink, clouds smeared across the horizon. I seized Kara's hand. "Tell me exactly what happened." She blinked up at me, sleep in her hair. She's upstairs too, she's lonely after band camp. I swallowed, tried to smile. Band camp's over. She shrugged. She said she'll stay if I want her to. That night I waited. I set the alarm for every 15 minutes and sat in the darkness with my phone flashlight on. At 2:45, I heard it. The soft tap of small shoes on the hardwood by Kara's door. I flipped on the light. Nothing moved. I crept out and knelt by the door. The hallway stretched ahead, wallpaper yellowed with age, the far end disappearing into gloom. I heard a soft voice next door, not Kara's. Anna, calling my name, saying she missed me. The voice was distant, echoing as if from under the floorboards. I reached for the knob. My palm found cold metal. I swiveled the light along the walls. The footprints, all 8 of them, led down the hall toward the stairs and then stopped. I answered the call. Anna. No reply, just heavy breathing. I pressed my ear to the door and felt vibrations on the wood, a thudding heartbeat. I forced the door open and flicked the torch. The carpet was bare, no footprints. I scanned the hall. The heavy front door at the bottom of the stairs was ajar, a sliver of moonlight cutting across the rug, dancing. The latch was unlatched. We always locked it. I ran down, slammed it shut, locked 3 deadbolts, turned. The entire house was dead silent. The next day I sold the apartment keys, packed our few belongings into Mara's van, and headed west toward the pine forests outside Lufkin. I told Kara to choose a new room, anywhere. She picked the back of the van, with a sleeping bag and her favorite stuffed rabbit. Late that night, parked under towering pines, I heard the whisper again, soft as wind. Let me stay with you. I bolted upright. Silhouettes of trees moved in the wind outside. No face at the window. I hugged Kara tight, shaking. She rubbed my back sleepily. She's upstairs too, May. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. I stopped the van, turned off the engine, and stepped into the cool night. The woods were alive with cicadas, their chorus a blanket of sound. I took a breath, looked up at stars deep and endless. I'm sorry, I whispered. I can't let you stay. I waited. Nothing. I climbed back and lay beside Kara. The breathing returned, soft and rhythmic. I closed my eyes. At dawn I drove us on, leaving the pines and the whispers behind, heading for the wide-open plains where I hoped the wind would carry the bad memories away. But every time I glance in the rearview mirror, I see something small perched up in the back seat, a pale shape with dark eyes and tangled hair, kneeling beside Kara, whispering, "Let me stay with you." And when I dare to look again, the seat is empty, and the rearview mirror shows nothing but the long straight road and dust devils spinning in the distance. And sometimes when I arrive at motels, I find 2 footprints pressed into the thin layer of dust on the windowsill, just above where Kara sleeps, and I know the spirit has followed us, still pleading, still lonely, still wanting to stay upstairs too.